the 17th of December 1944. A frozen field outside the Belgian town of Malmedy. The snow was knee-deep and stained red in a perfect circle, 80 yards across. 84 American soldiers lay dead in that field. Most of them were unarmed. Their hands had been raised in surrender when the machine guns opened up. Some were finished off at point-blank range, a single pistol shot to the head, delivered by SS troopers walking calmly between the bodies, kicking each man in the ribs before deciding whether he needed another bullet. The men who pulled those triggers belonged to Kampfgruppe Piper. Elite, hand-picked, loyal directly to Hitler, and by sundown that day, they were already miles down the road, laughing in their half-tracks, certain that no American officer would ever learn the truth and that if anyone did, the war would be over before justice could find them. Well, they were wrong about one thing. They hadn't factored in a 3-star general with a pearl-handled revolver, a famous temper, and a personal hatred of war criminals that bordered on obsession. This is the story of what happened when George S. Patton heard about the field at Bagnères Crossroads and what he did next that the U.S. Army spent the next 40 years trying to keep quiet. To understand what happened at Bagnères, you have to understand the man who gave the order. Joachim Piper, 29 years old. Blonde, charming, fluent in 3 languages. A colonel in the Waffen-SS who had once served as personal adjutant to Heinrich Himmler himself, Piper was not a soldier in the ordinary sense. He was a true believer. He had watched Himmler sign execution orders over morning coffee. He had toured the Eastern Front, where his own battalion earned the nickname the Blautorch Battalion because of what they did to Russian villages that refused to surrender quickly enough. Burned alive, entire families, sometimes hundreds at a time. The records exist. They are not in dispute. By December 1944, Hitler handed Piper command of the Spearhead Unit for one final, desperate gamble, the Ardennes Offensive. What Americans would later call the Battle of the Bulge. Piper's mission was simple. Punch a hole through the thin American line in the forest. Race to the Meuse River. Capture the Allied fuel depots. And do it in 72 hours. The orders Piper received from above were chilling. Speed above all. No prisoners if prisoners would slow the advance. A wave of terror, Hitler called it. A wave of terror to break the American spirit. Piper assembled roughly 4,000 men, 117 tanks, and a long column of half-tracks. On December 16th, he crossed the line of departure. By the next morning, he was approaching a quiet Belgian crossroads called Bagnères, where Battery B of the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion was about to make a wrong turn, straight into the worst place on earth that any American soldier could possibly be that winter. The men of Battery B were not combat infantry. They were artillery observers. Mostly young, average age 21. Most of them had been in Europe less than 3 weeks. They had never fired a shot in anger. Their convoy of about 30 vehicles was heading south to support the 7th Armored Division, following a map that nobody had bothered to update. Around 12:45 inches the afternoon, the lead jeep crested a small rise at the Bagnères Crossroads, and there, sitting on the road in front of them, engines idling, was the entire forward column of Kampfgruppe Piper. The Germans opened fire instantly. Tank rounds shredded the American trucks. Within 90 seconds it was over. The survivors, somewhere between 120 and 130 men, climbed out of the wreckage with their hands above their heads. They were herded into a snow-covered cattle field on the south side of the road. Some were still teenagers. A few were medics, clearly marked with red crosses on their helmets. Then 2 SS half-tracks pulled up. The machine guns rotated. And without a single word of warning, without an order anyone heard shouted, they opened fire on the unarmed men standing in that field. A survivor named Kenneth Ahrens later testified under oath. According to his sworn statement filed in 1946, Ahrens described what he saw in one short sentence. They shot us down like animals. Some men fell wounded but alive. They lay perfectly still in the snow, holding their breath, listening to their friends moan. And that's when the SS troopers walked into the field with pistols drawn and started finishing the job one shot at a time. Boots crunching closer. A pause. A gunshot. Then boots crunching closer again. Now think about that for a moment. Put yourself in that freezing field, face down in red snow, hearing the footsteps come for you. What would you have done? A handful of men, maybe 43 in total, somehow survived. Some played dead until nightfall and crawled into the woods. Others, B. Others bled out slowly in the snow. A few bleeding from chest wounds, from leg wounds, from gunshots that had missed the brain by half an inch managed to crawl through the woods to a Belgian farmhouse. They told their story, and within 48 hours, that story was racing up the chain of command, from battalion to division to corps to army headquarters. By December 19th, the news had reached one specific desk, a desk where a leather-bound diary sat open, a desk belonging to the commanding general of the 3rd United States Army. George S. Patton read the report in silence. Then he read it again. And then, according to officers present in the room, he stood up, walked to the window, and said 5 words very quietly. They are not soldiers anymore. 3rd Army Headquarters, Luxembourg City, the 21st of December 1944. The room smelled of cigar smoke, coffee, and wet wool. Maps covered every wall, red arrows pushing east, blue arrows holding firm. Patton had been working for 19 hours straight. He was 60 years old, exhausted, and personally directing the largest wheeling maneuver in American military history, pivoting his entire army 90 degrees to relieve Bastogne. And then a staff officer placed the Malmedy report on his desk. Patton read it once. Then he opened his personal diary, the leather-bound one his wife Beatrice had given him, and uncapped his fountain pen. The entry he wrote that night still exists. The original sits in the Library of Congress. It is short. It is brutal. According to the diary entry Patton wrote on December 21st, he summarized the situation in one line. "The Germans are murdering our prisoners." That was it. No outrage, no exclamation marks, no flowery language. Just a flat, cold sentence the way a prosecutor might write down a verdict before sentencing. Officers who were in the room that night told later interviewers that Patton did something strange. He did not yell. He did not throw anything. He did not curse. Anyone who served under Patton will tell you that was the dangerous Patton. The quiet one. He stood up. He poured himself a drink. He looked at the map of the Ardennes, and then he turned to his chief of staff, General Hobart Gay, and said something that Gay would repeat quietly, off the record for the rest of his life. If you've made it this far, you understand. This wasn't about regulations anymore. This was about something older. Something that goes back to the Old Testament. Stay with me, because what Patton said next is where the official record stops, and the unofficial one begins. There is no document, no signed directive, no official memorandum stamped with Patton's 3-star letterhead. Military historians have searched the 3rd Army archives for decades. They have found nothing because Patton was too smart to write it down. What they found instead were the consequences. In the days immediately following Malmedy, a pattern emerged across multiple units of the 3rd Army. SS prisoners, specifically Waffen-SS, specifically men wearing the double lightning bolts on their collars, stopped arriving at rear area holding pens in the numbers you would expect from an advancing army. Combat after-action reports filed in late December 1944 and early January 1945 show a strange, consistent anomaly. Engagement reports listed heavy SS casualties, but prisoner counts were near zero. A sergeant from the 5th Infantry Division, a man from rural Georgia, who later gave a recorded interview to a military historian in 1971, described what happened when his platoon cornered 12 SS troops near the town of Echternach. According to the transcript of that interview, the sergeant said simply, "We'd heard about Malmedy. We all had." That was all he said. The interviewer did not press further. Now, was this justice? Was this vengeance? Was this a war crime answering a war crime? Military ethicists have argued about it for 80 years. The answer depends entirely on which desk you are sitting at. If you are sitting at a desk in Washington writing the Geneva Convention into policy binders, it was illegal. If you are standing in a frozen Belgian field, 21 years old, watching your friends get executed with their hands up, the answer is something else entirely. Patton himself never confirmed the order. He never denied it either. But in a private letter to Beatrice, declassified in 1974, he wrote something that historians consider the closest thing to an admission that exists. According to that letter, dated the 3rd of January 1945, Patton wrote, "My men know what is required of them." 6 words: careful, deliberate, and absolutely damning. The official reports tried to bury what happened next. But the SS was about to discover in the most brutal possible terms that George Patton's memory was very, very long. Joachim Paper did not make it to the Meuse River. He never came close. His column 4,000 men, 117 tanks, the pride of the Waffen SS ran out of fuel in the Belgian forest near La Glisse. Patton's Third Army, combined with the First Army pushing from the north, had cut every supply line. By December 24th, Piper's men were burning their own tanks to keep warm. By December 26th, Piper made a decision that said everything about the kind of man he was. He ordered his surviving officers to abandon their vehicles, abandon their wounded, and slip out through the forest on foot in the dark, leaving approximately 800 injured SS soldiers behind. He saved himself. He left his men to die in the snow. The Americans who found that abandoned column 3 days later, the burned tanks, the frozen wounded, the bodies stacked like cordwood near a farmhouse wall, filed reports that were routed directly to Third Army headquarters, directly to Patton's desk, and the war moved on. Spring came. The Rhine was crossed. Germany collapsed from the inside like a building whose foundations had been quietly removed. On the 8th of May, 1945, the war in Europe ended, but Patton was not finished. In June 1945, 1 month after the German surrender, U.S. Army investigators formally opened the Malmedy massacre case. 73 SS officers and enlisted men were identified, arrested, and charged with war crimes. The trial was held at Dachau inside the walls of the same concentration camp the SS had built to murder people in. The symbolism was not accidental. Piper himself was arrested in May 1945 by American agents. He was calm at his arrest, polite even. He told the arresting officer he was certain the charges would not stick. According to the arrest report filed that evening, the officer noted one detail. Subject showed no remorse whatsoever. Think about that. The man who walked between the bodies at Bagnères, or ordered others to sat across a table from American officers and felt nothing. At the Dachau trial in 1946, 43 of the 73 defendants were sentenced to death. Piper himself received the death penalty. 42 others received life sentences or long prison terms. And Patton, where was Patton during all of this? He was dead. Killed in a car accident near Mannheim, Germany, on the 21st of December 1945, exactly 1 year to the day after he had read the Malmedy report and written those 4 cold words in his diary. The Germans are murdering our prisoners. Some coincidences carry weight. This one has haunted historians ever since. The courtroom at Dachau was cold in the winter of 1946. The same kind of cold as Bagnères. The same gray sky pressing down through narrow windows. The same silence before something terrible is confirmed. One by one, the SS men who had walked through that Belgian field with pistols drawn were brought before American military judges. Some wept. Some stared at the ceiling. Some even there sat with their arms crossed and their chins up, as if the whole proceeding was beneath them. Joachim Paper was among the last to be sentenced. He stood straight. He showed no expression when the judge read the verdict. Death by hanging. According to a court reporter present that day, Piper's only response was to straighten his collar, a small, deliberate gesture that said everything about who he was and nothing about what he had done. The sentence was never carried out. And this is where the story turns complicated, where justice, as it so often does, bends without breaking. In 1948, amid growing Cold War tensions and a shifting American political calculus, a review board began re-examining the Malmedy convictions. Defense attorneys, some of them later found to have used deeply questionable tactics, argued that confessions had been coerced. The death sentences were commuted. Life sentences were reduced. But 1956, every single convicted Malmedy perpetrator had been released from prison. Piper walked free. He moved to France. He lived quietly under his own name in a village in the Haute-Saône region, translating military books for a German publisher. He corresponded with former SS comrades. He never apologized, not once, not in any letter, any interview, any private document that has ever surfaced. On the 14th of July 1976, Bastille Day, of all nights, his house was firebombed. Piper died in the fire. French investigators attributed it to left-wing militants. The case was never officially solved. Some people, when they hear that, go quiet. Others nod slowly. History rarely delivers the clean ending we want. But sometimes Sometimes it delivers something close enough. Now here is what Patton would have said about all of it. We know because he told us. In his diary, in his letters, in the speech he gave to the Third Army before they crossed into Germany, a speech his staff tried to tone down and he refused to change a single word of. Patton believed that the measure of a commander was not how many men he led into battle. It was whether those men believed, truly believed, that their lives mattered to the man giving the orders, that they were not cattle, not numbers on a casualty report, that if they were murdered in a frozen field with their hands raised, someone with enough rank and enough fury would make sure the world knew their names. 84 men died at Bonniez Crossroads on the 17th of December 1944. Most of them were kids. Most of them had been in Europe less than a month. None of them ever saw home again. But they were not forgotten. Not by Patton, not by the prosecutors at Dachau, and not if you are still watching this by you. If your father, your grandfather, your uncle served in the European theater during the Second World War, if they were there in that brutal winter of 1944, in the Ardennes, in the snow, leave their name in the comments below. Tell us what unit they served in. Tell us what they saw. These men deserve to be remembered by more than a line in a history book. And the comments on this video will outlast every history book ever written about this war.